My mom told my wife, "He deserves better than you." I walked in, carried her suitcase to the front door and said, "You need to leave." She stood there for 10 minutes before finally driving away. I'm 34, and I need to tell you about the 3 days that changed my entire relationship with my mother. Well, technically, it was 2 days, because she didn't make it to day 3, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me give you some background first, because this didn't come out of nowhere. It felt like it came out of nowhere, but looking back, the signs were there my whole life. I just didn't want to see them. I grew up in Knoxville, Tennessee. My mom Patricia raised me and my older brother Garrett, mostly by herself, after our dad left when I was 7. And look, I'll give credit where it's due. She worked 2 jobs for a stretch. That kept us fed, kept a roof over our heads. That part was real, but so was the other part. The part where Garrett was the golden child and I was the backup plan. Garrett was the athlete. Garrett was the one who got his football highlights taped and replayed at every family gathering. Garrett was the one my mum introduced first at church at cookouts, at parent-teacher conferences she actually showed up to. I was, and this is Mason, like an afterthought, like a PS at the bottom of a letter nobody asked for. I didn't resent Garrett for it. He didn't ask to be the favorite. He was actually a decent brother most of the time. But my mom made it clear in 1,000 little ways that I was the reliable one, not the remarkable one. I was the kid who got B pluses and didn't complain. The kid who mowed the lawn without being asked. The kid who stayed home on Friday nights to keep her company when Garrett was out being Garrett. And she never once said thank you for any of it. Not once. By the time I graduated high school, I knew the deal. I wasn't going to get the fanfare, so I put my head down, went to community college, transferred to UT, got a degree in accounting, and started building a life that didn't depend on my mother's approval. It took me a while, but I got there. I met my wife, Claire, when I was 27. She was working as a dental hygienist and had this way of making you feel like whatever you just said was the most interesting thing she'd heard all day. Not in a fake way, in a way that made you realize most people don't actually listen when you talk. Claire listened, she remembered, she cared. We got married 2 years later, bought a little 3-bedroom ranch house in Mville, about 20 minutes south of Knoxville. Nothing fancy, but it was ours. We painted the kitchen this sage green color that Claire picked out, and every morning I'd sit at the island with my coffee and think, yeah, this is exactly what I wanted. My mom came to the wedding, she wore white, which Claire laughed off because she's a saint, and she gave a toast that was mostly about Garrett's accomplishments and how proud she was of both her boys, which was her way of saying she was proud of one boy, and the other one happened to be standing nearby. Classic Patricia. After the wedding, we'd see my mum maybe 4 or 5 times a year, holidays, the occasional Sunday dinner. It was fine, manageable. Claire was always gracious. She'd cook my mum's favorite meals, ask about her garden club, compliment her hair, even when it looked like she'd styled it during an earthquake. Claire tried. She really tried. My mum was polite enough to Claire's face, but there were always these little jabs underneath, comments about how the house could use a woman's touch, even though Claire had decorated the entire thing. Questions about when we were having kids, phrased like Claire was the one holding things up. Once she asked Claire if she'd ever considered going back to school for something more serious, as if cleaning people's teeth for a living was some kind of hobby. Claire would brush it off. She'd squeeze my hand under the table and change the subject. But I could see it wearing on her, the little exhale she'd do after my mum left, the way she'd go quiet for an hour, then come back and say, "Your mum's just from a different generation," with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I should have said something sooner, I know that now. But here's the thing about growing up with a parent who makes you feel like you're always on thin ice. You learn to keep your mouth shut. You learn that rocking the boat means falling out of it, and nobody's going to throw you a life preserver. So I kept the peace. I told myself it wasn't that bad. I told Claire I'd talk to my mom next time. Next time never came. Then about 2 months ago, my mom called and said she wanted to come stay with us for a few days. She said she'd been feeling lonely since Garrett moved to Nashville with his girlfriend Brooke, and she just wanted some quality time with her baby boy. Her words, not mine. She hadn't called me that since I was 12, and even then, it felt like she was reading from a script. Claire was hesitant. She didn't say no, because Claire doesn't say no to family, but she got that look, the one where her mouth says, "Of course, of course." The look in her eyes said the rest. "I'm going to need more wine for this." I told her everything would be fine. It was only 3 days. We could handle 3 days. My mom arrived on Thursday afternoon. She pulled into the driveway in her old Buick with 2 suitcases, a canvas bag filled with what she called her essentials, and an attitude that made it seem like she was doing us a favor just by coming. I carried her bags inside, showed her the guest room, and she immediately commented that the mattress was too firm and asked if we had softer pillows. The first day went well, mostly. We had dinner together, and Claire made an incredible chicken piccata. My mom ate it without a single complaint, which, for her, was practically a standing ovation. After dinner, we watched a romantic comedy she picked out, and she only made 2 passive-aggressive comments all evening. One was that Claire's cooking was pretty good for someone who was not a professional chef. The other was about our living room. She said it needed real curtains instead of the Roman shades Claire had spent 3 weekends installing. I caught Claire's eye and silently mouthed, "I'm sorry." She just shrugged, got up, and refilled her water glass, although I was fairly sure it was vodka by then. That night, after my mum went to bed, Claire and I lay in the dark. Quietly she said, 2 more days, like she was counting down the end of a prison sentence. I laughed because I did not know what else to do. I thanked her for being so patient. She said she loved me and rolled over, but there was something in her voice. It was not the kind of tired that comes from needing sleep. It sounded like the exhaustion of carrying something heavy for far too long. Looking back, I should have known that day 2 would be when everything fell apart. Instead, I woke up the next morning thinking about coffee and whether we had enough eggs for breakfast. That is how life works, isn't it? The biggest moments usually begin with something as ordinary as thinking about eggs. Friday morning started like any other morning in our house. I got up at 6:30. That might be early for most people, but for me it was actually a little late. I have always been a morning person. I enjoy the quiet before everyone else wakes up. I made coffee, fed our dog Rusty, a goofy golden retriever mix who believes every person exists to scratch his ears, and scrolled through the news on my phone. Claire came downstairs around 7, already dressed for work. She only had a half day at the dental office, so she would be home by 1 o'clock. She kissed me on the cheek, grabbed her travel mug, and whispered, "Keep your mom busy so she doesn't reorganize our pantry again." Apparently, while we were watching the movie the night before, my mom had rearranged our spice rack. She put everything in alphabetical order. Who alphabetizes cumin? My mom came downstairs around 8:30, wearing the same floral housecoat she had owned since the Clinton administration. She sat at the kitchen island, looked around like she was inspecting the place, and asked if we had any real cream for her coffee. We only had oat milk. She looked at it as if I had offered her motor oil. I made her scrambled eggs, toast, and some fruit. She ate about half before saying her stomach was sensitive, which was really her polite way of saying she did not like the food. I cleaned up, kept my mouth shut, and suggested we go for a walk since the weather was nice. She said her knees were bothering her. I suggested sitting on the back porch. She said the porch furniture looked worn out. I suggested watching television. She said there was never anything worth watching anymore. So we sat in the living room while she flipped through a magazine on the coffee table, criticizing every outfit, every recipe, and every decorating idea she saw. I sat there with my second cup of coffee, nodded along, and reminded myself it was only the second day. One more night, and she would be driving her Buick back home. Around noon, my mum started talking about Garrett. She asked how he was doing in Nashville. Was Brooke treating him well? Did I think they would get engaged soon? She spent nearly 30 minutes talking about his new apartment, his promotion at the logistics company, and how proud she was that he had really figured his life out. I smiled, nodded, and probably said, "Yeah, that's great, Mum," about 40 times because that was what I had always done. Then she changed the subject. "You know, Mason, I worry about you sometimes." She said it like she was delivering bad news. I asked what she meant. She said I seemed settled. I told her I was settled. That was exactly the point. She shook her head. "No," she said. "I mean, you've settled. Like you've stopped reaching for something more." I reminded her that I had a good job, an amazing wife, a house we owned, and a dog who loved me unconditionally. What exactly am I supposed to be reaching for? She waved her hand as if I had completely missed the point. Garrett has ambition. He is always chasing the next opportunity. "You've always been comfortable," she said. She said comfortable the way other people would say mediocre. I felt my jaw tighten, but I let it go. I had been letting it go for 34 years. What difference would one more time make? Claire got home around 1:15. She walked in carrying a bag of groceries, smiling and looking completely relaxed. I remember thinking, good, she's in a good mood. Maybe the rest of today will go smoothly. She greeted my mum, started putting the groceries away, and said she was planning to make pot roast for dinner. My mum smiled and said, "That sounds nice. Maybe I can help." "I make an excellent pot roast. I could teach you my way." Claire smiled back and said, "Sure, that sounds fun." Like I said before, Claire is a saint. I had to run a quick errand. My friend Travis had loaned me a drill the week before, and I had promised to return it. He lived about 10 minutes away, so I told Claire and my mom I would be back in about half an hour. Claire gave me a look that said, please don't leave me alone with her, but also I'll manage. I kissed her goodbye and headed out. I dropped the drill off at Travis's house, talked with him for about 15 minutes about a deck he wanted to build, and then drove home. The whole trip took around 35 minutes. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed the front curtains were open. I could see my mom standing in the kitchen while Claire stood at the counter with her back turned, chopping something. I came in through the side door that leads into the mudroom and opens into the hallway beside the kitchen. That door is quiet. It does not creak, and the latch barely makes a sound. I was not trying to sneak in. That is simply how the door works. Then I heard it. My mum was talking. She was not whispering or raising her voice. She sounded completely calm, like she was making ordinary conversation. Then she said something I will never forget. You know he deserves better, don't you? I froze. I was standing in the hallway, maybe 8 feet from the kitchen entrance, with my keys still in my hand. I could not see either of them, but I heard every single word. There was a short pause, then Claire calmly asked, "Excuse me?" My mum replied, "I'm not trying to be mean, Claire. I'm saying this because I care about him. Mason has always settled in life. He settled for community college. He settled for accounting. And..." She paused, like she was carefully choosing her next sentence, which made me think she had practiced this before. "I think he settled when he married you." The silence afterward was louder than anything I had ever heard. I stood there in that hallway, and I swear my blood turned cold in seconds. My keys were still in my hand. My half-finished cup of coffee was sitting on the kitchen island, getting cold. Somehow that forgotten cup felt like the perfect picture of my relationship with my mother. Half-finished, cold, ignored. Claire did not answer right away. When she finally spoke, her voice shook, but not because she was weak. She was trying to stay in control. "Patricia, I'm going to assume you didn't just say that to me in my own kitchen." My mum laughed. She actually laughed. It was the same smug little chuckle I had heard all my life, but this time it was aimed at the woman I loved. "Oh, sweetheart, don't be so defensive. I'm his mother. I've known him his entire life. I know what he's capable of, and I know what he deserves. You're a lovely woman, but lovely isn't enough. He could have done so much better with someone who pushed him." That was the moment I walked into the kitchen. I did not speak. I simply stood in the doorway. Claire noticed me first. Her eyes were red, but she was not crying. She stood there holding a knife in one hand and a carrot in the other, looking at me like she did not know whether I had come to save her or just watch everything fall apart. Then my mom turned around. I saw the same expression she always had whenever she got caught. For a split second, panic crossed her face before she quickly replaced it with innocence. She smiled. "Mason, honey, you're back. We were just talking." I looked at my mom, then I looked at Claire. Then I glanced at my coffee sitting on the counter. Without saying a word, I turned around, walked down the hallway to the guest room, picked up my mom's suitcase, carried it to the front door, and placed it on the porch. I never raised my voice. I never cried. I never explained myself. I simply carried her suitcase outside. Of course, my mom followed me. She stood in the living room watching me carry her luggage and asked, "Mason, what are you doing?" "Mason, stop. What is this?" I opened the front door, set the suitcase on the welcome mat, and turned to face her. "You need to leave," I said. She stared at me as if I had spoken a language she had never heard before. She stood there for 10 full minutes. I know exactly how long, because I kept watching the clock on the microwave while I stood in the kitchen doorway. She stood there for a full 10 minutes. During that time, she went through every trick she had. First came confusion. "Mason, I don't understand what's going on." Then came denial. "I didn't say anything wrong. Claire and I were just talking." After that came the guilt. "After everything I've done for you, after all the sacrifices I made, this is how you treat your own mother." Then came the tears. Not real tears. The kind she could turn on whenever she wanted. The same tears she'd use if Garrett forgot to call on Mother's Day. They were meant to make you feel like the worst person in the world. I didn't move. I didn't say a word. I just stood there in the doorway with my arms crossed while Claire sat quietly on the couch behind me, watching everything happen. Eventually, my mom picked up her suitcase, carried it to her car, put it in the trunk, and drove away. She never said goodbye. She never looked back. She just left. Claire and I barely spoke for the next hour. She stayed on the couch while I sat on the back porch with Rusty. When I finally came back inside, Claire was standing in the kitchen, right where my mum had been. She looked at me and quietly asked, "Are you okay?" That was Claire. My mother had just told her she was not good enough, and the first thing she cared about was whether I was okay. The truth was I wasn't. Still, I told her I was fine, because that was what I always said. She saw right through me. She always did. She walked over, wrapped her arms around me, and I rested my face against her shoulder while every memory came flooding back. Every time my mum compared me to Garrett. Every time she brushed past something I had accomplished like it did not matter. Every time she found something wrong with the life I had built. That night I barely slept. I kept hearing the same words over and over. He settled when he married you, as if Claire was some kind of backup plan, as if the woman who made me laugh every day, brought me water without being asked, and remembered exactly how I liked my sandwiches cut, somehow was not enough. The nerve of it made my chest feel tight. The next morning my mum started calling. I ignored every call. She called 6 times on Saturday and another 4 times on Sunday. By Monday she switched to text messages. "Mason, this is ridiculous. You're overreacting. I was only trying to help. Call your mother." Every message hit me like a punch, but I never answered. Then she called Garrett. He called me Monday evening, and I could tell from the way he sounded that Mum had already told him her version of the story. "Hey man, Mum's really upset. She said you threw her out? What happened?" I told him everything, word for word. Exactly what she had said to Claire. There was a long silence. Then he finally spoke. "That's messed up." He did not defend her. He did not make excuses. He simply said it was messed up. Then he added, "I'm sorry, man. That wasn't right." Hearing that meant more than I could explain. My whole life I expected Garrett to take Mum's side. He usually did. Or he stayed neutral, which felt like the same thing when you were the less favored kid. This time was different. He heard what she had done and called it exactly what it was. The next 2 weeks were hard. I am not going to pretend otherwise. I carried this weight in my chest everywhere I went. I went to work at the accounting firm, sat at my desk, worked through spreadsheets, ate lunch by myself, came home, and felt relieved and guilty at the same time. Relieved because I had finally stood up to her. Guilty because she was still my mother, and I had put her suitcase on the porch like she was a stranger. Claire was incredible through all of it. She never pushed me to talk before I was ready. She never tried to solve everything or tell me what I should do. She simply made sure I ate, made sure I got some sleep, and reminded me every day that I had made the right decision. One night she looked at me and said, "You chose me." I'll never forget that. Around the 3rd week, something changed. I stopped thinking so much about what my mum had said and started thinking about what I wanted for my future. I had spent my whole life trying to impress someone who never applauded me. Why was I still performing? That was when I decided to start therapy. My therapist's name was Dr. Carter. He was quiet, wore glasses, had a beard, and looked more like the owner of a small brewery than a therapist. At our first session, I sat down and said, "I think my mom has always seen me as the lesser child." He nodded and simply said, "Tell me about that." So I did. I talked for 45 straight minutes. He never interrupted, he never judged me. He just listened, took notes. And when I finished, he said, "That is a heavy burden to carry for 34 years. Therapy helped. Not all at once, not like flipping a switch, but little by little. Dr. Carter helped me recognize patterns I had never noticed before. He showed me that I had spent my entire life trying to earn the love that should have been given freely. He helped me understand that I had confused keeping the peace with actually living in peace, and he made me realize my silence had never been strength. It had been survival. At the same time, things at work were going really well. In fact, better than ever. My boss, Denise, reminded me of a friendlier version of a drill sergeant, and she had been encouraging me for months to apply for a senior manager position. I had been putting it off because honestly, I did not think I was ready. But after everything with my mum, something changed. I was tired of doubting myself just because someone else always had. I applied for the position, aced the interview, and got the promotion. The raise was enough for Claire and me to finally finish renovating the basement. We even had enough left over to start a real savings account. For the first time, it felt like we were building a solid future. Claire and I grew even closer during that time. We started a Saturday morning tradition. First the farmer's market, then coffee at a little downtown place called Mud and Water, followed by a walk through the park by the river. Sometimes we talked about everything. Other times we talked about nothing at all. We talked about having kids someday and the places we wanted to visit. She dreamed of Ireland. I wanted to see Montana. We decided we would do both. I also started cooking more. It was not because Claire needed the help. I realized that chopping vegetables and following a recipe helped quiet my mind. I even made my first risotto from scratch. It was awful. Claire still finished the whole bowl and told me it was ambitious, which is probably the nicest thing anyone can say about bad risotto. About 6 weeks after I put my mum's suitcase on the porch, her messages started slowing down. At first she texted once a week, then once every other week. Every message sounded a little more desperate than the one before. I miss you. This isn't fair. I'm your mother, Mason. I read every single one. I answered none of them. Then, about 7 weeks later, Garrett called again. This time, he sounded careful. Hey, Mum's been calling me a lot. She's not doing very well. I asked what he meant. He said she had been telling people at church that I had abandoned her. She had been crying during her garden club meetings. She had even called our Aunt Lorraine and claimed my wife was manipulating me. That one hurt. Manipulated by my wife. Like I could not think for myself. Like Claire was controlling me instead of being the woman my mother had insulted in her own kitchen, who still asked if I was okay before thinking about herself. I thanked Garrett for letting me know, then I sat with it. I did not send an angry text. I did not react at all. Instead, I thought about what Dr. Carter had been teaching me about boundaries. A boundary is not punishment. It is protection. The people who hate your boundaries are usually the ones who benefited when you did not have any. So I stayed silent. I had a feeling the story was not over yet. I was right. About 9 weeks after my mum left, I got a call from my Aunt Lorraine. Lorraine was my mum's older sister, and she had absolutely no patience for nonsense. She raised 4 kids on a teacher's salary, lost her husband when she was 52, and once told a telemarketer that if he called again, she would drive to his office and unplug the phone herself. Lorraine did not bluff. She called me on a Wednesday evening. No small talk, no greeting. Mason, I need to talk to you about your mother, and I need you to listen before you say anything. I told her I was listening. She explained that my mom had been calling her every few days, crying and saying I had cut her out of my life for no reason. She claimed I threw her out because Claire did not like her, and that my wife had turned me against my own mother. Lorraine said she listened the first few times. But the story kept changing. The details never stayed the same. Eventually she asked, Patricia, what exactly did you say to that girl? Mom gave her a cleaned-up version. She claimed she had only shared some concerns about whether Claire was the right person for me. Lorraine was not buying it. She kept asking questions until my mom admitted more than she meant to. Then Lorraine got quiet. Mason, she told your wife she wasn't good enough for you while she was a guest in your own house. I said, yes, that's exactly what happened. There was a long pause. Then Lorraine sighed. Your mama has been doing this since we were children. She did the same thing to your father. She told him his family wasn't good enough. His job wasn't good enough. She always acted like she deserved better. That's why he left, Mason. It wasn't because he didn't love you boys. It was because she made him feel like he would never be enough. That hit me like a freight train. My whole life I believed my dad left because he was irresponsible, because he could not handle commitment, because he chose himself over his family. That was the story my mum built, one piece at a time. I believed it for 27 years without ever questioning it. Lorraine told me she had spoken to my dad a few years after he left. He was living in Louisville, working construction, and heartbroken that he had lost contact with me and Garrett. She said he tried to stay involved. My mum made sure he couldn't. She returned his letters, blocked his phone calls, and even convinced a judge he was unstable. Eventually, he gave up. Not because he wanted to, but because he was worn down. After that call, I sat on the back porch for a long time. Rusty came over and rested his head on my foot. Somehow, he always knew when something was wrong. I called Claire outside and told her everything. She listened, held my hand, and asked, "What do you want to do?" I already knew the answer. I wanted to find my dad. It turned out to be easier than I expected. His name is Victor Reynolds. I searched online, found a listing in Louisville, and spent 2 days staring at his phone number before I finally worked up the courage to call. Claire sat beside me on the couch when I dialed. My hand was shaking. Not a little, a lot. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Hello?" His voice was deeper than I remembered, but I knew it was him. I took a breath. "Dad, it's Mason." There was a silence that lasted maybe 5 seconds, but it felt like an hour. Then he quietly said, "Mason." Just my name. But the way he said it, it sounded like he had been waiting 27 years to say it. That was all I needed to hear. We talked for 2 hours. I sat there on the couch while Claire made tea and Rusty snored at my feet. My dad told me everything. He explained how my mom had slowly pushed him out of our lives. She kept telling him he was a terrible father. She intercepted birthday cards. She sent Christmas presents back. He even told me he had saved every letter he ever wrote to me and Garrett in a shoebox, hoping one day one of us would come looking for him. A shoebox full of letters from the man I had spent my whole life believing did not care. Before we hung up, we made plans to meet. The next weekend, Victor drove down to Millville. I will not lie. I was nervous. I was 34 years old and anxious about meeting my own father. But the second I saw him step out of his truck in my driveway, a tall man with grey hair and the exact same crooked smile I saw in my own mirror, the nerves disappeared. They were replaced by something warm, something that felt long overdue. We spent the entire weekend together. He met Claire and immediately loved her. He threw a ball for Rusty for nearly 30 minutes without stopping. He sat in our kitchen and ate the same pot roast Claire had planned to make the day everything fell apart. He said it was the best meal he had eaten in years. Claire's eyes filled with tears. Mine did too. I blamed it on allergies. By the end of that weekend, everything finally made sense. The picture was clearer than it had ever been, and it hurt more than I could have imagined. My mother had not just failed to love me the way she should have. She had spent years destroying my relationship with the one person who truly tried to stay in my life. She took my father away from me, not because he was dangerous, not because he neglected us, but because he refused to worship her the way she expected. I never told my mom any of this. I did not call her. I did not send her updates. But I knew she would find out eventually. Small towns talk. Families talk. The moment people learned Victor Reynolds was sitting in my kitchen eating pot roast, the story my mum had spent nearly 30 years creating was bound to fall apart. It happened sooner than I expected. Garrett called me on a Tuesday. "Dude, Mum knows about Dad." He told me she had called him in a panic after someone from church mentioned seeing a truck she did not recognize parked in my driveway. She started asking questions. She figured it out. According to Garrett, she was furious. Not sad, not ashamed. Furious, as if I had betrayed her simply by learning the truth. I told Garrett to give her a message. I said I was willing to talk, but it would happen on my terms, at my house, with Claire sitting beside me, and she had to be willing to answer one question honestly. Otherwise, there was no reason to come. Garrett asked what the question was. I said, I want to know why. Why she said those things to Claire, why she drove Dad away, why she spent my whole life making me feel like I would never be enough. I did not want excuses. I did not want her changing the subject. I wanted the truth. Garrett passed the message along. 2 days later, my mum called and agreed to come. Saturday, noon. I spent those 2 days getting myself ready, not planning some big confrontation, not thinking about revenge. I just wanted my thoughts to be clear. I talked with Dr. Carter. I talked with Claire. I talked with Victor. He looked at me and said, "No matter what happens in that room, you've already won. You know who you are now." That's the one thing she could never control. Saturday finally arrived. I got up early, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen island. Claire came downstairs, kissed my forehead, and quietly said, "I'll be right beside you." At 11:55, I heard tires crunching on the gravel driveway. It was my mum's Buick. The same car as always. She parked and stayed inside for a few minutes before finally getting out and walking toward the front door. This time, I was the one who opened it. She looked smaller than I remembered. It had only been about 10 weeks since I had seen her, but somehow she looked like she had aged an entire year. Her hair was not styled the way it usually was. She was not wearing her usual lipstick. She carried only her purse, and for the first time in my life, she walked into my house without criticizing anything. Claire was already sitting in the living room. My mum glanced at her, then looked away. I pointed toward the couch. "Sit down, Mum." She sat. Claire stayed in the armchair across from her. I sat beside Claire. Rusty wandered in, sniffed my mum's shoe, and walked away. Even he could tell something was wrong. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. Then my mum did what she always did. She tried to take control. "Mason, before you say anything, I want you to know I've been miserable. I haven't slept. I can barely eat. You're my son, and this has been the hardest thing I've ever gone through." I let her finish. Then I said, "Mom, I told Garrett I had one question. Do you remember what it was?" She looked down. "Yes." "Then answer it." She started with an excuse, just like I expected. "I was only trying to protect you. That's what mothers do." Tears filled her eyes, the same kind she'd used 10 weeks earlier. But 10 weeks of therapy had taught me to recognize the difference between real emotion and manipulation. I shook my head. "Mom, Telling my wife she wasn't good enough for me in her own kitchen wasn't protection. It was cruelty. Call it what it was. Then Claire spoke. Patricia, I've been kind to you for 7 years. I've held my tongue more times than I can count. Then you stood in my kitchen and told me I wasn't enough for your son. I need to know why. My mom stayed silent for a long moment. When she finally answered, her voice was barely above a whisper. Because I was jealous. Neither Claire nor I expected that. She looked at both of us. You two have something I never had. You actually enjoy being together. You're kind to each other. I never had that with your father, or anyone else. Watching you have it reminded me of everything I missed. She wiped away tears. This time they were real. I convinced myself I was protecting you, but the truth is I was punishing Claire because she had what I always wanted. The room fell silent. Rusty came back, laid down at my feet, and closed his eyes, as if even he knew the hardest part was over. I looked at my mum. You drove Dad away. Aunt Lorraine told me what happened, and Dad filled in the rest. He didn't leave because he didn't love us. He left because you made it impossible for him to stay. Then you erased him from our lives. She lowered her head. I was angry. I was hurting. I had 2 little boys and believed your father was supposed to fix my life. When he couldn't, I blamed him. You didn't just blame him, I said. You took our father away. Garrett lost his childhood with him. I lost 27 years, and you let us believe it was all his fault. She finally broke. Not the controlled tears from before. Real sobs. She cried like someone who had finally been forced to face the truth. Part of me wanted to comfort her. That was the little kid in me. But I stayed where I was. Claire squeezed my hand while my mum sat with the weight of everything she had done. Eventually, she calmed down, wiped her eyes, and quietly asked, "What do you want me to do?" I answered without hesitation. "I want you to apologize to Claire. Not to me, to her. And not the version that makes you feel better, the one she deserves." My mum turned to Claire. "What I said was wrong. It was cruel, and it wasn't true. You're the best thing that ever happened to my son. I think I've known that since the day he brought you home." I was bitter, and I took it out on the person who deserved it the least. "I'm sorry." Claire nodded. She didn't say it was okay because it wasn't. She simply said, "Thank you for saying that." Then I told my mum my conditions. If she wanted to be part of our lives again, she had to start therapy. She also had to call Victor and apologize for the lies she told us about him. She would always be welcome in our home, but if she ever disrespected Claire, me, or anyone else under our roof again, she would leave immediately, and that door would never open for her again. She nodded. I could tell accepting those conditions was one of the hardest things she had ever done. Patricia Reynolds was not the kind of woman who took orders from anyone, especially from the son she had always believed would never stand up to her. But I think, for the first time, she realized that being reliable did not mean being a pushover. The son she had underestimated for 34 years had built a life worth protecting, and I was going to protect it whether she liked it or not. She left about an hour later. This time, there was no suitcase on the porch. She hugged me at the door, and it felt different, lighter. It was not the hug of someone who believed she owned me. It was the hug of someone beginning to understand that a relationship has to be earned. That was about 3 months ago. Today, things are different. My mum started therapy. She goes every Thursday. She rarely talks about it, which I actually see as a good sign. She seems to be working through things instead of putting on a show. She also called Victor. I do not know everything they said, but Victor told me she apologized. She cried, and he accepted it. At the same time, he told her the damage could not be undone, and they would never have a close relationship again. He said it with kindness, because that is the kind of man Victor has always been. A good man who lost 27 years with his sons because someone else's version of the story mattered more than the truth. Now, Victor and I talk every Sunday. He is coming down for the 4th of July, and he and Claire are already planning a cookout. It will probably be a disaster, because neither of them knows how to grill, but they have not figured that out yet. Garrett and I are closer than we have ever been. Recently, he admitted he had started looking at his relationship with Mom differently. He said he had always been the favorite, but never stopped to think about what that had cost me. I told him none of it was his fault, but hearing him say that meant more than he realized. As for Claire and me, we are doing better than ever. We have started talking about having kids someday. It is exciting, terrifying, and exactly the future I want. She still makes that same chicken piccata my mum could barely compliment. And every morning I still sit at our sage green kitchen island with a cup of coffee. The difference is, now I finish it. My mom is still trying. She came over for dinner last month. She complimented the pot roast. She asked Claire about work. She petted Rusty. She never criticized the furniture. It was awkward, imperfect, and a little uncomfortable, but it was also the most honest conversation I have ever had with her. I do not know if we will ever have the relationship I wanted when I was a kid. That chance probably disappeared years ago, but maybe we can build something new, something honest. And I have learned that honesty is worth far more than perfection. So that is my story, a 3-day visit that lasted only 2 days and changed my life. If you have always been the reliable one, the child who kept quiet because you thought making waves would only make things worse, let me tell you this: the waves will not drown you. And the people who truly love you will still be there after the storm passes. I know that because one of them is standing in my kitchen right now, asking if I want another cup of coffee. The answer is always yes.